The Black Death, a cataclysmic event that swept through 14th century Europe, remains one of history's most devastating pandemics. As it snuffed out millions of lives, it also reshaped economies, challenged religious beliefs, and spurred cultural and societal transformations. But what were the origins of this deadly disease? How did medieval societies respond to its relentless spread? What medical measures were taken? And perhaps most intriguingly, how did the aftermath of such widespread death cause profound changes in European society? In this video, we will explore the answers to these questions. The Black Death's origins are believed to lie in the vast steppes of Central Asia. By the early 1340s, the disease had manifested in the trading city of Kaffa, located in the Crimea. The Mongols, who were laying siege to the city, catapulted infected corpses over the city walls in one of history's early instances of biological warfare. From Kaffa, fleeing merchants and sailors inadvertently carried the disease aboard their ships, setting the stage for the pandemic's rapid spread. In 1347, the port city of Messina in Sicily became one of the first European gateways for the plague. Ships arriving from the Black Sea brought with them not only goods, but also rats infested with fleas, carrying the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the pathogen that caused the plague. The city's inhabitants were soon gripped by the disease, and panic ensued. As people fled Messina, they unknowingly carried the contagion with them, facilitating its spread across the continent. From Sicily, the disease traveled to the Italian mainland, reaching the bustling trade hubs of Genoa and Venice by 1348. These cities, with their extensive maritime networks, became launch pads for the plague's further dissemination. By the end of 1348, the Black Death had reached the shores of Spain, the heart of France, and the British Isles. The following year, it penetrated the interior of the European continent, affecting regions as diverse as Scandinavia in the north, the Byzantine Empire in the east, and the Islamic realms of Al-Andalus in the west. By 1351, just 4 years after its arrival in Messina, the Black Death had spread almost throughout the entirety of Europe, leaving devastation in its wake. The Black Death presented itself in 3 primary forms, each associated with a distinct set of symptoms and outcomes. The most common form was the bubonic plague, named after the characteristic buboes that developed in the infected individual. Buboes are swollen and painful lymph nodes that typically appear in the groin, armpit, or neck. These inflamed nodules could grow to the size of an egg and often became necrotic, turning black and oozing pus. The septicemic form of the plague was a direct invasion of the bacterium, Yersinia pestis, into the bloodstream. This form was particularly lethal and could kill within a day. Symptoms included high fever, chills, and extreme weakness. As the infection progressed, victims would experience disseminated intravascular coagulation, a condition where small blood clots develop throughout the bloodstream. This could lead to gangrene in the extremities, causing fingers, toes, and even limbs to turn black and die. The third form, the pneumonic plague, affected the lungs. It was the only form of the plague that could spread from person to person through respiratory droplets. Symptoms began with a severe cough, often containing blood, followed by difficulty in breathing and chest pain. The rapid progression of the disease in the lungs made it the deadliest form, with death often occurring within 2 to 3 days of the first symptoms. The Black Death's arrival in Europe brought with it a staggering death toll, with some estimates suggesting that up to 60% of Europe's population perished. In some cases, entire villages and towns were left deserted as their inhabitants succumbed to the disease or fled in fear. The once bustling streets of major cities became eerily quiet, with homes and businesses closed. As the disease ravaged communities, many sought answers and solace in religion, viewing the plague as a divine punishment for humanity's sins. This sentiment was so pervasive that it gave rise to various religious movements and practices aimed at seeking penance and divine mercy. One such movement was the flagellants, groups of people who believed that by publicly whipping themselves, they could atone for their sins and those of others. These groups, often dressed in white robes, would march from town to town, performing public displays of penance, chanting hymns, and urging others to repent. Their practices, while initially tolerated, were eventually condemned by the Church, particularly after some flagellant groups began to espouse heretical beliefs. The Church, a dominant force in medieval Europe, faced its own challenges during this period. While many clergy members bravely tended to the sick, the high mortality rate among the clergy and the need for rapid replacements led to the ordination of less qualified individuals. This, combined with the Church's inability to provide clear answers or halt the disease, led to growing disillusionment among the populace. The widespread fear and desperation also led to scapegoating. Jewish communities, already marginalized in many parts of Europe, became convenient targets. Rumors spread that Jews were poisoning wells, leading to a wave of anti-Semitic violence. In Strasbourg in 1349, for instance, several thousand Jews were burned alive after being blamed for the outbreak. Similar pogroms occurred in other cities like Mainz and Cologne. With limited understanding of disease transmission and without the tools of modern microbiology, physicians and healers grappled with the plague using the medical knowledge available to them. One prevailing theory of disease at the time was the miasma theory, which proposed that diseases were caused by bad air or corrupt vapors. This belief led many to think that purifying the air could prevent or cure the plague. As a result, sweet-smelling herbs like rosemary, juniper, and ambergris were burned in streets and homes. Later, physicians would often carry plague doctors' masks, bird-like face coverings with a long beak filled with herbs and spices, believing that this would purify the air they breathed and protect them from the disease. Bloodletting, a common medical practice of the time, was also employed as a treatment for the plague. The idea behind bloodletting was to balance the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. By releasing excess blood, physicians believed they could restore this balance and promote healing. Leeches were sometimes used for this purpose, placed on the skin to draw out blood. Also, poultices, kinds of creams made of various materials, including crushed herbs, tree resins, and even animal excrement, were applied to the buboes in an attempt to draw out the disease and reduce swelling. Disturbingly, some physicians also recommended drinking concoctions made from mercury, arsenic, or crushed emeralds, though these treatments were often as deadly as the disease itself. As the plague continued its deadly march, some cities implemented public health measures in an attempt to stem its spread. Quarantine, a term derived from the Italian word quaranta, meaning 40, was introduced in port cities like Venice. Ships arriving from plague-affected areas were required to anchor offshore for 40 days before their goods and crew could enter the city. This practice aimed to ensure that if the disease were present on the ship, it would manifest and be identified before the ship was allowed to dock. Despite these efforts, the medical community's understanding of the Black Death was limited, and many of the treatments employed were ineffective or even harmful. It would be centuries before the true nature of the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the causative agent of the plague, was discovered and effective treatments developed. This massive loss of life led to a shortage in the number of people who could work on farms. The scarcity of labor meant that many fields went untilled, leading to food shortages and rising prices. At the same time, the decline in population resulted in a surplus of goods and a drop in demand, causing deflation in certain sectors of the economy. Additionally, trade routes were disrupted as cities and ports were quarantined or abandoned, leading to a decline in international commerce. Surprisingly, with fewer workers available, those who survived the plague found themselves in a position to demand higher pay. This shift was evident in the rising wages of the latter half of the 14th century. This shift in the balance of power between labor and the land-owning elite disrupted the established feudal system. Serfs, who were previously bound to the land they worked on, began to challenge the constraints of feudalism, seeking better conditions and more freedoms. The Statute of Laborers, enacted in England in 1351, was an attempt by the English monarchy to curb rising wages and prevent serfs from leaving their lands. However, such efforts were often in vain, as the old structures of feudal obligation were gradually replaced by more modern labor and land use practices. The newfound agency among the working class eventually led to tensions with the elite, culminating in events like the English Peasants' Revolt in 1381. Furthermore, the vast inheritances left behind by plague victims led to a rapid redistribution of wealth. Many survivors, suddenly finding themselves richer, began to invest in new ventures or purchase land, leading to a rise in a new class of merchants and landowners. Culturally, the Black Death played a role in shifting Europe from the medieval period to the Renaissance. The massive loss of life prompted introspection and a re-evaluation of societal values. The arts and sciences flourished in the subsequent centuries, with increased emphasis on individual achievement and humanism. The Italian Renaissance, which began in the late 14th century, can be seen, in part, as a response to the existential crisis posed by the plague. Religiously, the Church's inability to provide answers or effective interventions during the plague years led to growing disillusionment among the populace. This sentiment set the stage for religious reforms and challenges to the Church's authority in the coming centuries, most notably the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. In essence, while the Black Death was undeniably a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions, it also acted as a catalyst for significant societal evolution, pushing Europe towards new economic systems, cultural renaissances, and religious transformations. If you love learning about the Middle Ages, please be sure to check out our video on medieval knights. I look forward to seeing you again next time.